It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton by Bobby Seale. This is from page 85, a subchapter titled Huey Backs the Pigs Down. And there are a few words in here that I'll be filling in, as it were. They're walking, he says, one day as we were walking out of the office, I guess we'd been there about a month or so, a pig passed by. He saw us coming out of the office with shotguns and pistols on our sides. About 6 or 7 of us came out of the office there in the daytime, and we looked at the pig as he passed by, and he jumped on his radio because he saw us coming out of the office with these pieces and stuff. We had just finished field stripping weapons, learning about 00 buckshot, learning about the 9mm and the .45, and having a political education session. We had a .45 and a .357 Magnum in the group and a couple of M1s. We had 3 or 4 shotguns by then. We bought up guns like a son of a bitch then. The pig went down 2 blocks and turned around, came back up the other side of the street. They were building rapid transit, BART, right down from Grove Street there, and we went up the other side of the boulevard and came back. We readily assessed that the pigs were ready to see what the F was happening, that this pig had radioed in, and he was running it down, how he had, quote, seen some N-words come out of a place here with some guns and blop, blop, de bloop, etc., come out of this office with guns and stuff. He was radioing into other pigs to help get them. Huey had his father's car that day, and he goes through that whole thing. So anyhow, the police pull him over, and Huey got in the car, and the pig came up to the window. You have any driver's license? So Huey rolled the window down. That wasn't more than a 3 or 4 inch crack in the window. Huey handed his license out the window. Is this your true name, the pig said? And Huey said, yes, that's my true name, Huey P. Newton. Is this your true address, 841 47th Street? And Huey said, yep, that's my true address, 841 47th Street. And what are you doing with the guns? And Huey said, what are you doing with your gun? This particular pig decided he wasn't going to argue, so he went back and got his little writing pad there where they fill out S-word. Your true name is Huey P. Newton? Huey said, that's right. The pig wrote it down. Your true address is 841 47th Street? Huey said, that's right. The pig then looked at his license. What's your phone number? And Huey said, 5, and stopped and wouldn't say anything else. And the pig said, 5 what? And this is when all the S-word between the pig and the party and the pigs began. Huey said, the 5th Amendment. You ever heard of it? Don't you know about the constitutional right of a person not to testify against himself? 5, I don't have to give you anything but my identification, name, and address, so therefore I don't even want to talk to you. You can leave my car and leave me alone. I don't even want to hear you. What do you mean, the pig said. And Huey said, just what I said. The constitutional right of any man is that he doesn't have to testify against himself. And Huey had a big M1 sitting to his right with his hand on it. I had this 9mm sitting beside me, and Huey had this M1 at his side. Huey was driving. 4 other brothers were in the back seat. One of them was Bobby Hutton. They were being quiet because Huey told them to be quiet, and the pig is going crazy. He's by himself, and Huey's got all these black N-words in the car going for the MFer. Meanwhile, while the pig is trying to get bad, 3 cars drove up behind us and 1 in the front. Some more were in the driveway. Blop, blop, blop de blue. Then another car came in front of us. A pig jumped out of the car, walked up to our car, and said through the crack in the window with a hoggish voice trying to sound intimidating, "What's going on here?" And Huey said, "The same basic procedures that are supposed to go on." Huey rolled the window down another 5 or 6 inches. The pigs were looking at the guns in the car. "Can I see that pistol there?" one of the pigs said. "No, you can't see it," Huey told him. I was beginning to get skeptical about what was happening because he pointed to my 9mm pistol. Huey was on probation, and if they thought that this was Huey's pistol, I didn't know this law stuff the way Huey knew it, so I moved the pistol over beside me real close. It had been lying in the middle of the seat. I said, "No, you can't see it." Huey said, "No, you can't see the pistol, nor this," pointing to his rifle. "And you don't want to look, and I don't want you to look at it. You don't have to look at it." "Is that your pistol?" he asked Huey. And I said, "No, it's not his pistol, it's my pistol." I said that because I was thinking the man's going to jump on Huey because he already told me about the probation law. If he gets caught with a pistol, he's burned. But if he gets caught with a rifle, the man can't mess with him because his probation officer told him he can carry a rifle or shotgun and he couldn't stop him. The pig said, "Can I see it or not?" So Huey said to me, "I'll talk." And then he said to the pig, "No, you can't see the pistol. Get away from the car. We don't want you around the car, and that's all there is to it." "Well, I can ask him if I can see his pistol or not," the pig says. So I says, "Well, you can't see my pistol." The MFers tried to get indignant. They were blabbing and oinking to each other about who in the hell we thought we were, and Constitution my ass, they're just turning it around. Then the pig said to Huey, "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Look, damn it," Huey said. He opened the car door. This is where Huey got mad. I mean, you have to imagine this N-word. He got mad because these dogs were going to carry on and they were bracing up like they were bad. Huey didn't go for this at all. Huey got very mad. He opened up the door saying, "Who the hell do you think you are?" In the first place, this man, pointing at the pig, came up here and asked me for my license like he was citing me for a ticket or observation of some kind. This police officer is supposed to be carrying out his duty, and here you come talking about our guns? Huey put his hand around his M1 rifle and continued, "We have a constitutional right to carry the guns, and anyway, I don't want to hear it." The pigs backed up a couple of steps, and Huey was coming out of the car. Huey had his hand back in the car getting his M1. And you know, if you've ever seen Huey, he gets growly but articulate. He came out of the car with his M1. Huey knows this law so well that he wouldn't have had the one M1 loaded inside the car. So he came out of the car, he dropped around into the chamber right away. Clack, clop. "Who do you think you all are anyway?" Huey said to the pigs. And the pigs were all on the sidewalk harassing all the brothers and sisters who gathered around. "You move on down the street," said the pig. Huey started interrupting. "You don't have to move down the street. Don't go anywhere. These pigs can't keep you from observing. You have a right to observe an officer carrying out his duty." And these pigs, they listened to all this S-word, and it goes on from there. It's a great story. Seize the Time by Bobby Seale. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Donald Trump did not send pipe bombs through the mail. Nor did Ivanka, nor did Eric, nor did Melania, nor did Jeff Sessions, nor did Mike Pence. The guy in his 50s was just arrested as a suspect. If he were a Nielsen household, I would be interested in knowing his viewing history. There was a person, a human being, who sent pipe bombs through the mail. Not suspicious packages, but pipe bombs. It was not sent by Donald Trump, the current United States president. But there is a toxic movement in this country. I did not say a toxic dynamic. I did not say overheated rhetoric. This is not about people yelling over marginal tax rates or whether healthcare should be more or less guaranteed, or more or less expensive, or more or less influenced by government intervention. It's not even about whether or not a woman has more or less control over her own body. This is not about sides of a debate. But there is a movement. It is funded. It has media propagandists. Their Proud Boys and allies explicitly advocate for violence. They view the democratic discussion as info wars. They advocate for the proliferation of weapons of war. And the movement recognizes that people will vote for the wealthy class if people are mad and scared enough, and if they see themselves as part of a team, largely a white team, divided from others by race, by geography, by culture, maybe by class and wealth. It is a movement that dehumanizes its opponents, that chants about the jailing of its opponents. You can get the crowd to cheer at the rallies about the good old days where you could rough people up. And that movement chose a champion. That champion was elected president. He fuels that movement. Donald Trump did not send pipe bombs through the mail, but nor did CNN, who criticized the president. Nor did Barack Obama, who not too long ago was the president. Nor was it Bill Clinton, nor Hillary Clinton, who received more votes than Donald Trump did to be the president. Nor did George Soros, nor John Brennan, nor former Attorney General Eric Holder, nor Maxine Waters, who Trump called low IQ, nor did Joe Biden, former Vice President of the United States, nor did Robert De Niro, nor did Cory Booker, who is a rumored candidate for President of the United States, nor did Mr. Clapper, who has also been a critic of the president. They didn't send pipe bombs either, but they received them. 2 more, and now someone in custody. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in for him. The call-in number is 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. It is Anything Goes Friday. When we say anything goes, let us have a few parameters. Let us not dehumanize. Let us not incite to violence. Let us not urge for revenge against those who incite for violence. Let us understand that this is not about team. This is not about a binary world that is a false understanding, a convenient one, given that most of us are blessed with 2 arms and hands and 2 legs and feet, but a false one. This is about, are we going to be a little better, or are we going to be a lot worse? Are we going to treat one another a little better, or are we going to treat one another a lot worse? And so as we have Anything Goes Friday, let us have some parameters. We can be angry, we can be scared, we can disagree sharply. But within those parameters, we do not incite violence. We do not dehumanize those with whom we disagree. We do not advocate for the revenge against people who harm us. In this conversation, we are built, and on our foundation is compassion and love. It includes anger. It includes weakness. But you can call in at 202-808-9925. 202-808-9925. I'm Jeff Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. There's a story of a lamp that I'm going to want to tell today. And what you would do if you had 3 wishes. I'm going to want to talk about Dinesh D'Souza today. Not for very long. I already a little bit regret saying his name. I want to talk about sides today. I want to talk about the fact that this, and by this I mean tomorrow, unless you consider it right now, maybe this is the pre-end, one of the two most important weekends in midterm or congressional election history. I want to talk about what we're doing this weekend. What are you doing this weekend? And I want to talk about what is at stake. Not just about pipe bombs, not just about holding this president to account, but what is at stake in human beings' lives? What actually matters? If this isn't just a game we watch, if we're not just rooting for our favorite team, or maybe just rooting against our least favorite team, what are we in fact rooting for? I want to talk about some predictions for after the election. And I'm going to take one call right now just before we go to break. Saul on Free Speech TV from Edinburgh, Texas. Thanks for being our first caller.
Oh, hello.
Hey, Saul.
How are you?
I am here with you is how I am.
Okay. You know, this is the world we live in. You know, it's a beautiful world. But I'm 76 years old, and hi, this is Sal.
Yeah, Saul, you're on the air, my friend.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, turn off your TV because I think we're on a delay, so you don't think I'm hearing you. But if you just listen to your phone, you'll hear me.
I'll put on the TV.
Make your point, Saul. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm 76 years old. And I've seen a lot of things happening in this world for a long time. These things, imagine if the bomb packages were real, were real. So, I don't know what kind of personality this guy has, but I guess it takes all kinds to live in this world. What I see is that sometimes people, maybe they say things like De Niro. You remember De Niro said, I want to punch Trump in the mouth, in the face. I mean, there are people in the world that get disturbed by things like that. I don't see why should they say something like that, especially a superstar like that. That's kind of low. It looks kind of low. It's not very nice.
Saul, I want to say thank you for calling. You're blaming Robert De Niro for receiving a pipe bomb in the mail. I do not blame Robert De Niro for receiving a pipe bomb in the mail. I will say that within these parameters, I agree with you. This is a beautiful world. We have to remember that beauty as we try to make it a little bit better rather than a lot worse. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff. We'll be back. We're with you on Free Speech TV and honored to be thus. Dan from Free Speech TV from Baldwin. How you doing, Dan?
Jeff, how you doing today?
Holding up.
I haven't heard anything about this, but I'd like to know who's paying for Donald Trump's prevarication tour. Is the taxpayers paying for this guy running all over spreading lies, or is it DNC or the Koch brothers paying for it?
By DNC, I assume you mean RNC. By generally presidential visits, and I have to admit, I've never looked at one of the balance sheets, but generally presidential visits are divided. And if it's campaign functions, then you calculate the amount that was campaign functions, and that's paid for by campaign funds. If it is official state business, then it's paid for by the taxpayer. It's paid for by federal funds.
That's probably the way he's putting it down on his paper.
And I would just say, and maybe this is cheap, but as always, when it comes to financial questions in Donald Trump, I'd love to see his tax returns. Maybe we'd learn more.
Oh, exactly. I hear you 100%. Hey, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dan. We're going to go double Dan. This is Daniel, who also might sometimes go by Dan, and the other Dan might in fact be named Daniel. I'm speculating. forgiveness for that speculation. Daniel from Port Angeles, Washington. I think Port Angeles, a town that played an important role in the Twilight series. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, I'll just correct you there a little bit. Port Angeles was the largest city in vicinity to the place Forks, where the Twilight thing sort of grew.
Exactly, and when they did, and Port Angeles was where they when they went on their night on the town, when the hero vampire, I'm forgetting the names, I'm sorry, like saved her life. That was filmed in Port Angeles, as I recall, Daniel. But I'm confident that's not
correct.
What you called.
That's correct. Anyhow, I have a theory, and I just wanted to purport to you what you think of my theory.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Oh, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the theory.
Okay, I think that that Paul Manafort, a name from the past, who's awaiting sentence, he was instructed by Vladimir Putin after he got $40 million from Putin to come over here and volunteer to be Trump's campaign manager for free, so he could just keep an open link to Russia and let him know what was going on. And I feel that really strongly, even though I can't prove it. It seems like it could be true.
That and forgive me if I want to just make sure I hear that you're saying that Paul Manafort was sent over essentially to be a Russian spy. Is that your hypothesis?
Russian spy? I don't know if he's sent over to be Trump's campaign manager by Putin, who paid him $40 million, which would seem like good recompense for that job.
Yeah,
he doesn't really have to be called a spy.
No, I didn't mean to cheapen your point by my response. And let me quickly respond before we have to go to break. Here's one way to think about it that doesn't sound in the pejorative sense as conspiratorial. Imagine you run a really big team. You want to get members of your team to be a part of as much influence of power as you possibly can. And so if you can put them in places of influence, if you can get them appointed and put them in a position where they can get others appointed who are members of your team, that's good. Now that happens all the time. The challenge is when it is our primary international adversary and when the leader of that team also happens to be Vladimir Putin, that sort of thing is pretty dangerous. I don't think what you're saying is crazy. It's Anything Goes Friday. Call. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. And honored to do it, honored to be with you. You are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. One of the things we're talking about is, in fact, the news this morning that not only were there 2 more pipe bombs sent through the mail, sent to critics of the current president, but also someone is now in custody. We don't know much about him as we gather news. This is a place you can stay to hear that news. We will be offering here at this point. What we know is it's some dude in his 50s. That's about all we know, and that he was arrested. Maybe an irrelevant fact, but he was arrested pretty close to Nancy Wasserman Schultz's office in Florida. Let's continue to take calls. It's Anything Goes Friday. Jonathan from Cottage Grove, Oregon. I know Cottage Grove. How you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me.
What's on your mind?
Well, I've been seeing a lot of narrative on the TV about can we really blame Donald Trump for encouraging this violence that now we're seeing? And my question is, can we hold him accountable for this if we can't hold him accountable for anything else that he's done?
I hear your question and appreciate it. Let me be clear. The word blame is an interesting one. In law, they talk about causation, and there tends to be 2 kinds of causation. One is but for causation. Would the thing have happened but for that other thing? And the other is more like blame. You might, any number of things. Some butterfly flaps its wings, and but for those flapping of those particular wings at that particular time, any number of things might or might not have happened. But you might not blame the butterfly for it. when it comes to Donald Trump and pipe bombs, I'm not talking about either kind of blame. It is a required opportunity for us to talk about the discourse in the country. And my note to play in this cacophonous symphony, I don't even get a stanza. But my note is that this isn't a both sides thing. It's not about just a toxic dynamic, but there is a toxic movement. And that movement does incite violence. I don't know anything about this dude other than he did a horrible thing and he might be warped in the head. But we do have to point more attention to the toxic movement that has taken over a once proud political party, and that has taken over the country. And we should be talking about that regardless of pipe bombs. We should be talking about that because there's an election in 10 days. And the way you hold that accountable is not to think that Donald Trump gave birth to that thing. He is not the head of the snake, as I have said when I have had the privilege of being your hopefully favorite substitute teacher here. He is merely the rattler. And you hold that accountable, you hold that movement accountable by not only winning elections in 9 days, but also by building a movement that over the next generation can restore democracy and strengthen democracy in the country. I don't think it is versus right versus left. And I don't even think it is. I'm willing to say right versus wrong, but I think it's democracy versus power against democracy versus entrenched property power. Sheila has been waiting patiently from Franktown, Colorado. Frankton is an interesting place that I've never visited, but I'm making a guess because I find a lot of places interesting, and that was not a great segue, but you are great. Sheila, what's up?
I just want to talk about the Michael Moore movie. Have you seen it yet?
I haven't. Did you like it?
It's excellent.
Yeah.
It is gripping. He lays everything out so good. There's things in there, and I'm pretty political. I listen to a lot of stuff. He lays out stuff I didn't even know. It's so truthful. I wish people that like Trump could watch it, but they won't. He just lays it all out. People got to go see it. It's coming back to the theaters just before the election. I had to drive a long ways. And if you can't get it at the theater, I think you can get it online eventually or whatever, but everybody has to see that movie. It's absolutely gripping.
All right, Sheila, when I get 3 recommendations for stuff, I try to do it, and you are my 3rd recommendation to see the movie. I'll see it, and I appreciate the call. Michael from Imperial Beach, California.
Okay, this will take a second, Jefferson. The last time we talked, it was about Mr. Solomon and the oligarchs. I asked Tom once if these oligarchs have a religion. Tom said, yes, they do. It's mammon, the love of money. So, Jefferson, do you ever see a time where the children of oligarchs will ever understand that this is their future, and if they don't control what happens in this world, that the whole world could be destroyed? That's basically it. I didn't write it down.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. And I'll cite somebody else. A dear friend of mine was an investment banker. One of the most interesting people I know. He had thought about getting into politics. He had talked to me about getting into politics. He once served on my board of directors. Instead, he became an Episcopal priest. The last time, and by the way, he did that, that was facilitated in part by the exit in his company, which provided him an 8-figure exit, which will take care of his family throughout their life and allow him to work in service. And he took a role at a church where their primary function is serving the houseless. And at our most recent lunch, he made the case to me as a former investment banker. He said, right now, the world's God is money. And people have to go back to God. And whether or not you believe in his God or whatever your own religious beliefs are, whether you're the child of an oligarch, as our caller was asking about, or whether you're a human being that has never met an oligarch, we have to have our true north. We have to have our root in compassion, in love, and loving thy neighbor, and try to make things a little bit better, and trying to make things a little bit better rather than a lot worse. That's even why I opened the show today, a day when most folks are talking about pipe bombs, to make sure that we don't incite a further escalation. Do we not be weak? that we not cow, that we not fail to tell the truth. But in doing so, our purpose is not escalation. The Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We'll be back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back.
Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Johann Hari's brand new book, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. So he starts out talking about how he had been on antidepressants for most of his life, from his teenage years into his 30s. And then he says, then when I was 31 years old, I found myself chemically naked for the first time in my adult life. For almost a decade, I had been ignoring my therapist's gentle reminders that I was still depressed despite my drugs. It was only after a crisis in my life, when I felt unequivocally terrible and couldn't shake it off, that I decided to listen to him. What I had been trying for so long wasn't, it seemed, working. And so when I flushed away my final packs of Paxil, I found these mysteries waiting for me, like children on a train platform waiting to be collected, trying to catch my eye. Why was I still depressed? Why were there so many people like me? And I realized there was a third mystery hanging over all of it. Could something other than bad brain chemistry have been causing depression and anxiety in me and in so many people all around me? If so, what could it be? Still, I put off looking into it. Once you settle into a story about your pain, you're extremely reluctant to challenge it. It was like a leash I had put on my distress to keep it under control. I feared that if I messed with the story I'd lived with for so long, the pain would be like an unchained animal and would savage me. Over a period of several years, I fell into a pattern. I would begin to research these mysteries by reading scientific papers and talking to some of the scientists who wrote them. But I always backed away because what they said made me feel disoriented and more anxious than I had been at the start. I focused on the work for another book, Chasing the Scream, the first and last days of the war on drugs instead. It sounds ridiculous to say I found it easier to interview hitmen for the Mexican drug cartels than to look into what causes depression and anxiety. But messing with my story about my emotions, what I felt and why I felt it, seemed more dangerous to me than that. And then finally, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. So over a period of 3 years, I went on a journey of over 40,000 miles. I conducted more than 200 interviews across the world with some of the most important social scientists in the world, with people who had been through the depths of depression and anxiety, and with people who had recovered. I ended up in all sorts of places I couldn't have guessed at in the beginning. An Amish village in Indiana, a Berlin housing project rising up in rebellion, a Brazilian city that had banned advertising, a Baltimore laboratory taking people back through their traumas in a totally unexpected way. What I learned forced me to radically revise my story about myself, my story about the distress spreading like tar over our culture. I want to flag up right at the start two things that shape the language I'm going to use through all of this book. I'm reading from the introduction. Both were surprising to me. I was told by my doctor that I was suffering from both depression and acute anxiety. I had believed those were separate problems, and that is how they were discussed for the 13 years I received medical care for them. But I noticed something odd as I did my research. Everything that causes an increase in depression also causes an increase in anxiety, and the other way around. They rise and fall together. It seemed curious, and I began to understand it only when, in Canada, I sat down with Robert Kohlenberg, a professor of psychology. He too once thought that depression and anxiety were different things. But as he studied it for over 20 years now, he discovered, he says, that the data are indicating that they're not distinct. In practice, quote, the diagnoses, particularly depression and anxiety, overlap, end quote. Sometimes one part is more pronounced than the other. You might have panic attacks this month and be crying a lot next month. But the idea that they're separate in the way that, say, having pneumonia and having a broken leg are separate is not borne out by the evidence. Robert's side of the argument has been prevailing in the scientific debate recently. In the past few years, the National Institutes of Health, the main body funding medical research in the United States, has stopped funding studies that present depression and anxiety as different diagnoses. They want something more realistic that corresponds to the way people are in actual clinical practice, he explains. I started to see depression and anxiety as like cover versions of the same song by different bands. Depression is a cover version by a downbeat emo band, and anxiety is a cover version by a screaming heavy metal group. But the underlying sheet music is the same. They're not identical, but they're twinned. The second insight comes from something else I learned as I studied these 9 causes of depression and anxiety that he writes about in this book. Whenever I wrote about depression and anxiety in the past, I started by explaining one thing. I am not talking about unhappiness. Unhappiness and depression are totally different things. There's nothing more infuriating to a depressed person than to be told to cheer up or to be offered jolly little solutions as if they were merely having a bad week. It feels like being told to cheer up yourself by going out dancing after you've broken both your legs. But as I studied the evidence, I noticed something that I couldn't ignore. The forces that are making us depressed and severely anxious are, at the same time, making even more people unhappy. It turns out that there is a continuum between unhappiness and depression. They're still very different in the same way that losing a finger in a car accident is different from losing an arm, and falling over the street is different from falling over the cliff. But they are connected. The book, Lost Connections by Johann Hari. All aboard! It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
All aboard. If you found a lamp and you rubbed that lamp and out of the lamp came a genie, and the genie offered you 3 wishes, what would you wish for? Now, as a tactician, small child, I typically would wish for more wishes because my imagination did not want the boundaries of merely 3. It's not wishing for one thing, but wishing for a thing that could get you more things. This is what Republicans have been doing. When they win elections, they don't say, what wish should we grant? Let's pick our ultimate wish. Ultimate doesn't mean most, it means last. Let us wish for more wishes. Let us wish for judges with lifetime appointments. Let us aim for operatives, not just Republicans. Rehnquist, a Republican operative. And then let's get young operatives, Scalia and Thomas, and the growth of the Federalist Society. Let us wish for more wishes. A judiciary that can shape voting rules and contribution rules. Let us wish for the ability to send unfettered money to campaigns, to give us more wishes. Let us wish so that we can redistrict Congress and maintain control over Congress even if we don't win majorities in the country. And so we can have a majority of every branch of government without winning a majority in any of those branches of government. More wishes, please. Let us wish for more corporate consolidation of the media, which helps build the Fox and Sinclair networks on TV and vast networks on radio. they will root for us to have more wishes. We can run on abortion, but we'll never fully focus on or fulfill the wish to abolish it. Instead, we will wish for more wishes. Tax cuts will trigger more resources for campaign contributions, more wishes. We'll talk about a wall. We might never build a wall, but we can get our federal society majority on the Supreme Court. We can weaken public unions. We can suppress the vote. We can gut the Voting Rights Act. We can get money defined as speech and corporations defined as people and up defined as down. And we can wish for more wishes. What are you wishing for? It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. The penultimate weekend of the 2018 election, the defining congressional election of this century. What are you doing tomorrow? Let's take your calls. Tim from Durham, North Carolina. Thanks for calling.
Hey, Jefferson, can you hear me?
Tim, you there?
Yeah, can you hear me, Jefferson?
I can't really.
I'll call back.
No, that's
Thank
better.
you.
I can hear you there. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to get your thoughts on Newt Gingrich telling the reporters there that the liberal types that had those pipe bombs mailed to them, quote, brought it upon themselves. What do you think about that?
So the reason I try to take attention away from Donald Trump is not only because he thrives on attention, but also because I think it is by its very nature distracting. I know it's not entirely, he's the president of the United States. He merits and requires attention. But I want to pull something up. I think Paul Krugman said it pretty well this morning when he said, well, we've now figured out, the right wing has figured out their talking points, and their talking points include the pipe bombs were fake. In fact, you know what I want to do? I want to get that video of the Gingrich interview if we can, because he went on, and then I'll cite Paul Krugman. And by the way, if you have questions or thoughts, you can also tweet at me. I'm at Jefferson D. Smith, or you can tweet at Thom Hartmann, the show itself. That in that interview, I'm pretty sure the same interview, he was also asked about if Trump was going to be facing some heat and investigations when Democrats are elected, or if Democrats were elected to Congress. And he said, well, Donald Trump's not afraid. He's been sued all his life. He's not worried about it. He said, yeah, but if Democrats win Congress, they'll subpoena his tax records. He said, well, yep, and that'll go to the courts. And then we will see if the Kavanaugh fight was worth it. And then we will see if the Kavanaugh fight is worth it. So thank you for that call, because it reminds me about the Newt Gingrich interview. And when I talk about focusing on the movement and not just focusing on the figurehead, is that this movement now has a set of talking points, and the set of talking points is everything but, hey, folks, let's not incite violence. Hey, folks, let's make sure we don't dehumanize our political opponents. Hey, folks, yeah, you know what? Our president should be held accountable for inciting violence, whether or not it had anything to do with the pipe bombs, because it's not the kind of thing we ought to do. We probably shouldn't be chanting to try to get the locking up of our political opponents. That's not the kind of thing that we fought a revolution over. I know it was a long time ago. It's not why we fought World War II. Oh, I know the veterans are now passing away and we're forgetting their legacy. One of the reasons this stuff is happening, because we are forgetting the lessons of the past. But we do have a movement that is failing to hold itself to account unless its only objective is power. And for that, it holds itself to account. And the only language that it will speak is power. If that is the case, then the next best chance is Tuesday after next. And your next best chance to do something is tomorrow, or maybe even tonight, with phone banks and canvases, or maybe last-minute donations. Donations today and tomorrow still can get spent in last minute. You have to make most of your TV ad buys, but you can still boost your internet ad buys. You can't pay. You're probably going to give your staff bigger bonuses. You might if you win. But grassroots stuff on the ground the last 9 days matters a lot. So yeah, I did catch Gingrich. And then by that I mean I caught Gingrich. Brad, the Bilderberg Group, Loganville, Georgia. Go ahead.
Good morning. How y'all doing today?
Better now that we're hearing from you.
Good. I wanted to thank Tom, you, and your staff for providing the means of free speech for people like myself. I do believe, first let me make a point. I do believe strongly in exercising your right to vote. If you decide to do so, that is your right. I don't believe in voter suppression. Unfortunately, for the people, the listeners that you have, there's a conglomeration of the 120 of the most financially wealthy individuals in the world that have no morals. They're called the Bilderberg Group. They don't discriminate. They're Republicans, they're Democrats, they're liberals, and they're leaders from other countries. They're past, present, and future presidents, vice presidents, and others. They control the news media, the justice system, the war, the drug trade, the pharmaceutical, the stock market, just to name a few. They thrive on total world domination, in my opinion, by implanting chips into mostly newborns, sterilization of males, to releasing, as far as going to release known diseases into areas that need, quote unquote, thinned out, for a lack of a better term. From cover-ups such as the JFK assassination, 9/11, alien encounters, depletion of food and water sources, and the Pearl Harbor invasion. Apparently, greed is all they know. Smaller population is easier to control, so that must be what their mindset is. Most of us, I call people, I include us, I shouldn't, I call them ollies. Those are the people that keep their heads stuck in the sand, pretending like everything is hunky-dory in make-believe land. And for the people that I don't expect to get a lot of positive feedback, they'll probably say that it's just a conspiracy theory. It is a theory. It is not a theory, but a conspiracy by this group to brainwash and have control over everybody except themselves.
I want to take some time to reply to it, Brad, and thank you for the call. You listen to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. First of all conspiracy means is an agreement in secret to do something harmful. That's something that happens every day. What theory means is a hypothesis that has some fact to back it up. Saying something is a conspiracy theory doesn't mean it is inaccurate nor accurate. It just means it's something that has a few facts to bolster a hypothesis that something harmful is being done in secret. Where I would quibble a bit is that I tend to be skeptical that there is ever a single circle that controls everything, because there are multiple circles that are often in tension. Bilderberg Group is a real thing. It's a conference that was put together in the Netherlands, does include people from North America and Europe in extremely powerful positions, from media to finance to politics, etc. I am sure those people would like more power rather than less. Them being in cahoots with one another on occasion, at least to this conference, probably gives them a little more power rather than less. I would say this, where I think we can agree pretty strongly on, is that we need to build power for not just rooms like that. Whether or not you believe there's one magical room that does all this stuff.
Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. You can call in just a second. I'm Jeff Smith. Thanks for doing the numbers, 202-808-9925, and we'll be right back. You're on Free Speech TV. Mark Taylor Canfield about Washington State Initiative 940 in Seattle. Love hearing about the local stuff. What's happening in Seattle?
Hey, Jeff. Good to talk to you. I'm a journalist and musician here in Seattle and a longtime contributor to the show. I just wanted to let the audience and you know that there is a initiative in Washington State which is very important. That's going to be on the ballot on November 6th, and that is Initiative 940, which is an initiative to try to deal with the use of force by police officers. And this initiative would make it easier, actually, to prosecute police officers. In Washington State, we've had the weakest law of any state in terms of prosecuting for use of deadly force or excessive force in the state. So this is an attempt by the people. It's a people's initiative. We are a state with an initiative process where people, if you get enough signatures on your initiative, this particular initiative actually was referred to the voters by the Washington State Supreme Court. And one thing it would do is it would require police to receive de-escalation training and mental health training, which is something a lot of police reform advocates have advocated for. It would also require police to render first aid, and it would remove the requirement that prosecutors have to show that an officer showed malice in order for them to be prosecuted for use of deadly force. And as I said, we've had the weakest law in the country on this issue, and the Seattle Police Department itself has been under a Department of Justice review at one point for excessive use of force. So this is good news, I think, for the police reform advocates in this state. And of course, that's an issue, I think, across the country. I also wanted to mention Sarah Smith, who is running for Congress against 21-year incumbent Adam Smith, no relation. But Sarah Smith is actually a Democratic socialist who's a member of the Democratic Party, and she is running on a platform which calls for Medicare for all and free college education. So she sort of represents this new breed.
And say again, she's running for city council. Say again what she's running for?
She is running for Congress.
Running for Congress, excuse me.
Washington State.
And she's running as an additional party candidate, or is she running as a DSA party member, or is she running under the Democratic banner?
She is a member of the Democratic Party, and she actually got through the primaries with Adam Smith. We have an instant runoff system primary here in Washington State, so we'll actually be voting between two Democrats for this position in Congress. But
Mark, what publication? Are you a freelance writer, or what publication are you with?
I'm actually executive director of Democracy Watch News, which is an international not-for-profit news agency that studies pro-democracy movements around the world.
That's great.
But I also blog at Daily Kos, and I have my YouTube channel, and my show there is called the MTC Report. And I've been on Tom's shows many times before. He's a great guy, and I really support what you guys are doing. So keep up the good work, and it's good to hear from you, Jeff. I will definitely check out your work as well.
All right, Mark. Thanks so much for calling in.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. One of the things that I do want to encourage folks to call in on Anything Goes Friday, and the number is 202-808-9925, is what's happening locally, what's happening in your town. That so much attention goes to what's happening nationally. And the funny thing is, so much attention goes to Trump. Guess who's not on the ballot? Like, the one guy who's not on the ballot is Donald Trump. Congress is on the ballot, real important. So are legislative races, so are local ballot initiatives happening in towns all over the country. What's happening in your neck of the woods? I'm Jeff Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be right back. Anything Goes Friday. I'm Jeff. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for encouraging other people to do it. Thanks for tweeting to the show. Thanks for posting on Facebook. Thanks for calling your friend on your landline, if you still have one, and say, you got to listen to this. Because we appreciate the listeners. We appreciate building a community. One of the things that we're talking about today is what's at stake in this election. Lots of conversation, needed conversation about pipe bombs. Lots of conversation about the current president. Current president not on the ballot. That happened in 2016, happened again in 2020, unless something happens in the next 2 years. But there's lots of stuff that is on the ballot. One thing that's on the ballot is, of course, Congress. And that means healthcare is on the ballot. Here is what one candidate had to say. And rather than introduce her to start with, let's just play the ad. Nate, can we play that?
This is a story about my mom, but it could be about anyone's mom. She had survived breast cancer when I was very young, but her pre-existing condition hung over all of us when we lived here at the farm. I'm Alyssa Slotkin, and years later, my mom lost her job, so she lost her health insurance and couldn't afford the premiums. And that's when she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. I took a leave from the CIA so I could come home to take care of her. And Dave and I rushed our wedding at the farm so she could see it.
Seeing the love between the two of you is the thing that got me through the terrible months in the hospital.
That was one of her last really good days. So when I saw Congressman Bishop smiling at the White House after voting to gut protections for pre-existing conditions, something inside me broke. I'm running for Congress, and I approve this message because, Mr. Bishop, that's dereliction of duty, and it's a fireable offense.
Love the ad, but that's not only reason I played it. I wept when I saw the ad. Maybe because I'm a weeper, but also in part because it's personal. A story that I haven't shared here before. I don't think I've shared it on the radio before. My mom, when I was in high school, this part I've shared, when I was a little tiny kid, was diagnosed with cancer. She went into remission, and she had a mastectomy, it was breast cancer, and she was, as far as we could tell, cured. That was when I think I was 5. In fact, I know I was 5. When I was 14, her doctor made a pass at her, and she quit her HMO because it was her assigned doctor. And about, I think it was a week later, she was talking to a client. She was a psychotherapist, and she was talking to a client on the telephone, and she turned in her chair and broke a rib. She knew immediately what we would learn later after doctors had confirmed it, was that she had highly metastasized cancer that started as breast cancer, but now it was bone cancer and more. She made it through, lived another about 2 years, and went through that treatment without health insurance. We were very fortunate. Not for that. It tore me up and made me more of a jerk in my late teens and early 20s. But we were very fortunate that my grandfather ran the pension fund for LA Water and Power and had saved money and was able to help out with medical bills that ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Didn't do everything we might have done otherwise, but pretty much spent everything that the family had on her cancer care. This is not an isolated story. Healthcare is on the ballot. It seems a little less salient for some people because the news media has been covering everything but. Healthcare hasn't been on the front of the newspaper, but it's in the front of a lot of people's minds. This is why there's so many Republican candidates for Congress who've been just flat out lying, saying that they would never get rid of pre-existing conditions when they had already voted to get rid of pre-existing conditions. And they will again. And it has human consequence. And when Alyssa Slotkin, who is running for Congress, reminds people that there are human lives at stake and not just team building or team destroying, not just a tit for tat of revenge and anger and power building. I think that's how elections are won. When we call people to how we can be a little bit better rather than a lot worse. Let's take a call from Brenda, who has a poem. Hopefully it's short because we got to go to break in a second. Brenda from Oak Forest, listen on WCPT, Ain't Afraid of Me. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll just say real quickly, I've got an intellectual background, and I'm familiar with all the philosophical issues, but this poem caught my eye because I recently...
Read the poem. We've got like 40 seconds.
What did you do once you knew? It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started sailing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying? Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew?
Brenda, thank you so much for calling.
Thank you.
What did you do once you knew? Where were you at this point in history? We've got to hope this is the nadir for recognition of climate change, for the fight for democracy, for the growth in wealth disparities, for the proliferation of a movement that is dehumanizing its opponents? Where were you? What did you do when you knew? What are you doing this weekend? We're coming into the penultimate weekend of this election. But I would argue the biggest congressional election, often called a midterm election, in my lifetime. It will help us decide if the last couple of years has been the nadir. What are you going to do? This is Tom's show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatas, he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm Jefferson Smith. Thanks for being with us. A Florida resident was identified today as the suspect who sent a dozen pipe bomb packages to prominent critics of the current president, Donald Trump. What might not be surprising to you is that Cesar Sayoc, and forgive me if I mispronounce his name, who is the suspect, to be clear, not convicted. What might not be surprising to you, if the arrest is not an error, is that his white van had pictures of Donald Trump and the presidential seal plastered to the windows. I will say again, Donald Trump did not send pipe bombs. It turns out that Cesar Sayoc did. On the phone, we have Jody Jacobson, our friend from Rewire News, or Rewire.news if you want to find it easier, who is either fortunately or unfortunately timed to talk about our descent into state-sanctioned violence, an article that she just wrote. Jody, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me from the middle of Pennsylvania.
You're driving around. Are you doing election coverage stuff, or or are you on vacation?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. No, I'm actually doing election coverage stuff. I'm just coming back from Wisconsin, and I'm going to Georgia tomorrow. So, yeah.
I actually would like to ask what you've seen out there, but before I do, let's talk about what's happening. We've just learned that there is a suspect in custody. That happened just before our show started. What happened, I think, what we learned just during the break was that, and for people who want to stay tuned to what's happening, we will continue to give up-to-the-date information on the pipe bomb suspect and the pipe bombings. There now is a suspect in custody, Cesar Sayoc. If there's additional facts you want to offer, obviously feel free, but really want your analysis of how this fits into a bigger picture, or doesn't. Are we overstating the case that this is a part of a narrative arc or part of a way to understand what's currently happening in the world? It's just a bad dude who did some really bad stuff.
No, I think it's not overstating the case. And I think it's part of a continuum of violence that has been promoted by the right wing and, for a very long time at a sort of subterranean level, and now is wide out in the open in the form of a president who has incited violence from the time of his campaign. Let's not forget that, he said stuff like, knock them out, I'll pay your legal bills, tells police, rough them up, don't be so nice. He's said so many things. I mean, he has said that, he at one point on the campaign trail, he thinks that, Secret Service that were shadowing Hillary Clinton should put down their guns and see what happens. I mean, he is inciting violence openly. So the question of when somebody took that to the next level was not if, but when. And just by comparison, because this comparison is being made publicly in a lot of media commentary, the person who shot Republican congressman at a softball game last year was obviously a disturbed person, and obviously it was a heinous act. But it can't be tied to any candidate because no Democratic or progressive candidate was speaking and inciting violence. So you can have disturbed people that are unattached to any political motive, who have in their head a political motive but are not being incited by a political figure. But then you have a president of the United States that is openly inciting violence. So I don't think it's overstating it. I think we are fooling ourselves if we don't see the connection.
You mentioned Steve Scalise. That has been one of the 4 or 5 main talking points that the right wing has galvanized around over the last 48 hours. And you're right. I mean, Bernie Sanders never said, somebody lock up Steve Scalise. He was not listed on a...
I don't even know that Bernie Sanders ever mentioned Steve Scalise because Sanders is a senator and Scalise is a congressman. And, it's just that comparison is exactly the kind of gaslighting that we are seeing from the right wing, from the Republican Party, and from this administration, not taking responsibility for any of the actions that it is perpetuating. And you can look at that from a policy vantage point and see that they don't take responsibility. Like right now, their closing argument to get reelected is that they're going to protect pre-existing condition coverage when all they've done for the past 6 years is work to gut Obamacare. But and so they gaslight and lie all the time, and the lies become more and more blatant. But this kind of talking point comparing Sanders is just absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Krugman tweeted early this morning, so the right-wing line on the pipe bombs is consolidated, and I'll retweet this so people can see it if they want to. I'm Jefferson D. Smith, and you can also tweet at the Thom Hartmann Show. So the right-wing line on the pipe bombs is consolidated. One, it's fake news, never happened. By the way, Dinesh D'Souza, I said his name a second time. I'm so sorry I did. He said the same thing and compared it to women making false accusations of sexual assault. Second, it was a false flag operation by liberals. Third, anyway, the targets, whatever happens to them. Fourth, Donald Trump is the real victim. And you add the fifth, which is the false equivalency. How is the media, and thank you, Jody Jacobson, for joining us. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. How is the media covering this, or what's your analysis of how the conversation is going? Obviously, the huge thrust of of significant right-wing media is on those 5 or so talking points. How are you feeling about the coverage generally?
I think generally the coverage has been really ill-serving the public. Why? Because I think the more important issue, we know what right-wing media are going to say, but the more important issue is what more respected or more, mainstream media are going to say. And all I hear over and over, both from media commentators as well as from politicians, is both sides need to calm down. But that requires a physical leap to consider, for example, that protesters exercising their First Amendment peacefully, whether or not they were yelling, nonetheless peacefully, or people speaking out about sexual abuse around the Kavanaugh hearings, that is making that equivalent to what Donald Trump does every day from the bully pulpit of the presidency. Even today, he's going to have another rally. That is not only a false equivalency, again, it's participating in gaslighting, because we are allowed, in fact, part of our democracy requires us to hold our elected officials accountable. But we have a president, an administration, and a right-wing party in this country now that is hell-bent on destroying our democracy. It's that clear.
Yeah, and Jody,
so
go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, I think the media, every time they make these comparisons, is misrepresenting they're not doing their job.
Jody Jacobson from Rewire, thank you so much for being with us. And amen. My two big concerns are too much focus on both sidedness and too much focus on the president. Got to focus on the movement and what is helping to foment that stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be right back. This is Thom Show.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. Hello, Free Speech TV. Let's take, and first, let me just say, I'll have a second. Thank you very much for watching this show. Thank you for listening to this show on one of the non-commercial stations. Thank you for supporting the organizations who broadcast this show. Thank you for supporting the advertisers or sponsors. If you're on one of the non-commercial stations, one of the sponsors of that station or of this show. I looked at Talkers Magazine. This is the only among the top 11. I looked at the top 11 radio shows in the country. Tom's on there. So are like the people talking about how not to take on debt. And then pretty much right-wing radio talk hosts. That is not an issue of talent. It is not a matter of persuasiveness of the message. It is not a matter of how many people agree with it. It is a matter of distribution. How many stations will broadcast a show like this? How many advertisers will advertise on a show like this? And when the listeners ask for it and participate and demand it and call in and say thank you and support the stations that broadcast it, it makes it more possible. And, I just want to say thanks for doing that. Let's take a call from Will, who is right now winning the Patient Award, calling from Opelika, Florida. I hope I pronounced it right. Hello, Will.
Hi. How you doing?
Holding up.
I've been waiting for a minute. I've got a couple of curiosities that I'd like to run past you concerning the letter bombs that have exploded, which kind of makes me curious. I heard back in Donald Trump's campaign days, he made a comment that he think that he should be president for life. And there was fallout behind that statement he made. What was said is that the only way that could happen is if something happened in the country and martial law was declared and the Constitution was suspended, then he would be the absolute law in the land for the time the martial law it lasted. And I don't know, I agree with you that there's a movement in this country to trash that Constitution, just like the lady Jody just mentioned, that there is an alarming concern that a lot of things are happening that are leaning in that direction to trash the Constitution.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, appreciate you calling, Will. My thoughts. First of all, I don't want to be an alarmist unnecessarily or an exaggerator. I do think it is the case that Donald Trump does not have the same self-limiting impulses of most human beings, and certainly most people who have elevated to the presidency. Richard Nixon listened to, abided by a court order. I don't know that I have the same confidence that Donald Trump would. Donald Trump will respond to power. I think one of the reasons why I want to put not only focus on Donald Trump, but on the people who begat him, is that it will be those people who hold him accountable. Only those people, either the defeat of them in significant numbers, or those people themselves be able to hold him accountable. That's why we got to focus on them and not just him. He ain't the head of the snake. He's just a rattler. This is the Tom Show. I'm Jeff. You listen to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We're back. And thank you again to everybody who listens to this show, everybody who sponsors this show, everybody who supports the sponsors of this show, every board operator out there clicking the play button and making sure your radio station stays on, every public access cable station that is making sure that free speech stays on. Thanks to all of you for helping to build a community that is trying to do something a little bit better rather than a lot worse. We love you. More news on the pipe bomb suspect. Apparently, lots of Facebook posts blasting not only Soros but also Andrew Gillum, the candidate for governor in Florida. Hopefully, he was not. I'm glad none of these things went off. Somebody, by the way, a caller earlier called them fake bombs. There's no indication that I have seen that these are fake bombs. Only they are bombs that were undetonated. Everything I have seen said no, they have properly working innards. I haven't seen anybody with understanding what the plan to detonate them was, nor do I think it's the biggest thing at stake in the election on Tuesday, but did want to bring it up. Also wanted to reply to a Twitter comment who thought that I took the Bilderberg conversation too long as the guy was talking about implanting chips into people. I hope that I approached this, sharing this chair for a day, a little humbly. Sometimes I will err in the direction of not cutting somebody off. I hear you that you want me to play curator, and that is a fair request. I want to go now to Susie, who's calling about fraudulent mail in Eureka, Montana. Hey, Susie.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I got a piece of mail just yesterday that's designed to look like official government mail, you know, where you tear off the edges to get your W-2 and things.
Yeah.
Except it's from the Republican National Committee. It is a green stripe on it that looks exactly the same color, has my name and signature required on it, just like it was certified mail. Except it says my name or current resident. Now I open it up, and it's trying to get me at this late date to sign up for absentee ballot. It's got all the information filled in for me on an absentee ballot form from the Republican National Committee, which if I sent it in, it possibly would get to Lee Riggleman, our election administrator in my county, in time for her to put me down for one, which would not.
But you wouldn't get the ballot in time.
Vote in person. Right.
So I think what you just said, let me make sure, Sue, let me make sure I understand what you said. So you get something in the mail, looks like certified mail. You open it up, and it's encouraging you to sign up for an absentee ballot. And if you dutifully did it and sent it in, it might work, but then all of a sudden you wouldn't have sent it in time to actually get that ballot, because by the time they even turned it around, the election ought to be over.
Right. It has in bold red letters, must be received by November 5th, the day before the election, 2018, at noon. And if it was received by my administrator at that time, it might prevent me from voting in person.
Who is this sent by?
The Republican National Committee, 310 First Street Southeast, Washington, D.C.
And are you a registered voter in Montana as a Democrat?
I am also a precinct committee officer.
So you're a big D Democratic activist in Montana, and you haven't registered to vote recently in any other state?
Absolutely not. I've been here almost 10 years. I voted in every election.
So, Susie, thank you, Susie, for the call. And it only confirms, and this is the challenge. I mean, the old. Thank you, Susie, so much for calling. The old saw from Bob Packwood's old in Oregon, his old campaign head was hit low and hit late. And the reason is not only because that's at the moment of decision, but it's also when it's really hard to police. If you do stuff in the last week, and people should be watchful and call into Tom shows and post on your own social media and share with friends, watch out for dirty tricks, because if you do dirty tricks late enough, it's hard to clean them up. Joe from Free Speech TV from Cupertino, California. By the way, the call-in number here for people in Radio Land is 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. Joe, go ahead.
Love your show. You are by far the best substitute that I've seen for Tom in a while. You know, earlier in the week, Tom was talking about Thomas Paine, and so it got me to do some research. And I thought, well, I'd do some reading of what was it? I'm trying to remember the name of the pieces that he's talking about. But it's about the vote and about everybody gets one vote. The representative government, it requires that, you know, we support the concept that you can't buy the vote. The rich have no more right to take the vote away from the public than from the poor, right? And so, I mean, Thomas Paine's article, and I'm pulling it up as we speak, talks about, the dissertation of the principles of government. And Tom led off with this comment about the most important right is the right to vote.
So what Martin Luther King fought for was the right to vote.
Well, I think the way that it is written is the right of voting for representation is a primary right, which other rights are protected. And the right to take it away is to refuse a man, is to reduce him to slavery. Now, before that passage, it speaks about the fact that there's always somebody trying to limit the voters' access, and that those people should suffer the same penalty. That when they just restrict the right of one person, to
You're
vote,
suggesting they lose their right
of everyone.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you, Joe. We're about to go to break, and thanks for calling. I had a brief exchange, or at least I guess I replied to him, to a tweet that Marcos from Daily Kos had posted, which is the reason why Republicans are trying to block voting is they can't win fair. And my own reply was, it goes deeper than that. That what's happening in this movement is that keeping democracy from limiting the power of entrenched property, going back to John C. Calhoun and then James Buchanan's Virginia School, is the essence of the movement. The opposition to democracy is not merely tactical, it is raison d'etre. That the fight right now is not merely right versus left. It is democracy versus not democracy. It is versus the ability to make our lives a little bit better rather than a lot worse.
Our book today is Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World by Anand Giridharadas. This is from the prologue. All around us in America is the clank, clank, clank of the new in our companies and economy, our neighborhoods and schools, our technologies and social fabric. But these novelties have failed to translate into broadly shared progress and the betterment of our overall civilization. American scientists make the most important discoveries in medicine and genetics and publish more biomedical research than those of any other country, but the average American's health remains worse and slower improving than that appears in other rich countries, and in certain years, life expectancy actually declines. American inventors create astonishing new ways to learn thanks to the power of video and the internet, many of them free of charge, but the average 12th grader tests more poorly in reading today than in 1992. The country has had a culinary renaissance, as one publication put it, one farmer's market and Whole Foods at a time, but it has failed to improve the nutrition of most people, with the incidence of obesity and related conditions rising over time. The tools for becoming an entrepreneur appear to be more accessible than ever for the student who learns coding online or the Uber driver, but the share of young people who own a business has fallen by 2/3 since the 1980s. America has birthed a wildly successful online book superstore called Amazon, and another company, Google, has scanned more than 25 million books for public use, but illiteracy has remained stubbornly in place, and the fraction of Americans who read at least one work of literature a year has dropped by almost a quarter in recent decades. The government has more data at its disposal and more ways of talking and listening to citizens, but only 1/4 as many people find it trustworthy as in the tempestuous 1960s. A successful society is a progress machine. It takes in the raw material innovation and produces broad human advancement. America's machine is broken. When the fruits of change have fallen on the United States in recent decades, the very fortunate have basketed almost all of them. For instance, the average pre-tax income of the top 10th of Americans has doubled since 1980. That of the top 1% has more than tripled, and that of the top 0.001% has risen more than 7-fold, even as the average pre-tax income of the bottom half of Americans has stayed almost precisely the same. These familiar figures amount to 3.5 decades worth of wondrous head-spinning change with zero impact on the average pay of 117 million Americans. Meanwhile, the opportunity to get ahead has been transformed from a shared reality to a prerequisite of already being ahead. Among Americans born in 1940, those raised at the top of the middle class and the bottom of the lower middle class shared a roughly 90% chance of realizing the so-called American dream of ending up better off than their parents. Among Americans born in 1984 and maturing into adulthood today, the new reality is split screen. Those raised near the top of the income ladder now have a 70% chance of realizing the dream. Meanwhile, those close to the bottom, more in need of elevation, have a 35% chance of climbing above their parents' station. And it's not only progress and money that the fortunate monopolize. Rich American men, who tend to live longer than the average citizens of any other country, now live 15 years longer than poor American men, who endure only as long as men in Sudan and Pakistan. Thus, many millions of Americans on the left and right feel one thing in common, that the game is rigged against people like them. Perhaps this is why we hear constant condemnation of the system, for it is the system that people expect to turn fortuitous developments into societal progress. Instead, that system in America and around the world has been organized to siphon the gains from innovation upward, such that the fortunes of the world's billionaires now grow at more than double the pace of everyone else's. And the top 10% of humanity have come to hold 90% of the planet's wealth. It's no wonder that the American voting public, like other publics around the world, has turned more resentful and suspicious in recent years, embracing populist movements on the left and the right, bringing socialism and nationalism into the center of political life in a way that once seemed unthinkable, and succumbing to all manner of conspiracy theories and fake news. There is a spreading recognition on both sides of the ideological divide that the system is broken and has to change. Some elites, faced with this kind of gathering anger, have hidden behind walls and gates on landed estates, emerging only to try to seize even greater political power to protect themselves against the mob. But in recent years, a great many fortunate people have also tried something else, something both laughable and self-serving. They've tried to help by taking ownership of the problem. All around us, the winners in our highly inequitable status quo declare themselves partisans of change. They know the problem, and they want to be part of the solution. Actually, they want to lead the search for solutions. They believe that their solutions deserve to be at the forefront of social change. They may join or support movements initiated by ordinary people looking to fix aspects of our society, but more often these elites start initiatives of their own, taking on social change as though it were just another stock in their portfolio or another corporation to restructure. The book Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Both sides. Both sides. Both sides. Well, both sides. Both sides! It's a luxury to be able to be one of the sides. Imagine you represented one of the sides. Let's imagine you represented not one of the sides, but a movement that was trying to take over the country. And you're having a conversation with the people in charge. I don't know who they are. Whoever's in charge. And you said, now, let me get this straight. I'm allowed to, I'm one of the sides, like almost no matter what I do? As well, as long as you control the side, you get to be one of the sides. Now wait a minute. What if I don't agree with this side as it was formed? You know, they wanted to get rid of slavery, but I don't really like immigrants, and I don't really want people to vote more, and I don't really want people of color to get welfare benefits. So I don't really like what this side stood for when it started. Well, that doesn't really matter. As long as you can win the most votes, you get to be one of the sides. So okay, well, if I actually don't believe that everybody should have the chance to cast a ballot, or if I think we should make it harder, and so I'm not really a big fan of democracy in general, do I still get to be one of the sides, or do I just have to be a fringe kind of weird thing that's contra democracy? No. As long as you get the most votes and or control the most financial contributions, you get to be one of the sides. You mean like half? Like I get to be half of the debate and people think I'm half right and major media organizations will think my ideas are half okay? As long as you control one of these two sides, yes, you are half of the debate. Most of us have 2 arms and hands, 2 legs, 2 feet, 2 hemispheres of our brains. 2 is the smallest whole number, bigger than 1. So yes, you get to be one of the sides. But now, wait a minute. What if I appeal to Christian conservatives, but then I nominate a serial philanderer and multiple accused creep to the presidency? Do I still, then I brought, no, you still, yeah, no, that's still okay. Now, what if the only way for me to keep power is to manipulate the rules, to redraw the lines, to allow for unlimited secret money, to win Congress, to win the presidency without a majority? What if I do that? No, again, as long as the other side does a little bit of it too, you definitely get to be still one of the sides. Okay, now here's a big one. What if I get help from somebody? Well, who? Like Chamber of Commerce, NRA? No, like a big adversary. Well, the NRA, I mean, we've had unprecedented frequency of horrific gun violence. Sure, you can still, no, I don't mean them. You mean the people who want to erode the middle class and may have more gaping wealth disparities? You're worried that about, that's a tradition in this country. No, I don't mean them. Well, who? No, you're still one of the sides. Well, what if it's our biggest international adversary? What if I get help from them? And maybe in cahoots with a murderous dictator? No, it turns out you still get to be one of the sides. That would never happen. I'm sorry I've entertained the notion. There would never be a political system. There would never be a media that would allow it. There would be institutions, there would be voters that could allow such an absurd hypothetical. Donald, on the negative vote, ThomHartmann.com from Los Angeles, California. What's up, Donald? Are you the president of the United States?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
No, as a matter of fact, the apartment building I live in, hardly anybody here will call me by my first name because of that. I'm serious. People call me by my nickname. Well, I've got like about 30 different nicknames. People call
Barack?
me by
What's your nickname?
My middle name. Well, my stage name is Doc. It's D-A-K. That's the most common one.
All right. All right, Doc, go ahead.
At any rate, okay, so here's the thing. You mentioned a little while ago, democracy versus not democracy. I'd like to introduce something a little more extreme than that. Democracy versus the opposite of democracy, because not isn't the opposite. And in voting...
Yeah, it's just the absence. That's fair.
What's that?
Yeah, you're right. Not is just the absence. That's fair.
Exactly. And in voting, we have the same thing going on. When people have a negative vote intention, in other words, when they want to vote against a specific candidate, they're basically given the choice of casting a positive vote or casting a non-vote.
Yeah.
And we should be allowing them to cast a negative vote if they have a negative vote intention. There have been people who have been writing in things like against Hillary Clinton or not Donald Trump.
So how would a negative vote, help me, Doc, how would a negative vote work? I see on my ballot and I just click no. What happens then?
Well, it's not exactly no. It would be, you'd have, for example, instead of just having Donald Trump on the ballot, you would have for Donald Trump on the ballot and against Donald Trump on the ballot. And again, you would choose one just like you do now. So if you choose against a candidate, in the system we have now, you would give up your option to choose to vote for a candidate. You'd only get one or the other unless we change the system. But
no, Donald, that's helpful, or I should say, Doc. The alternative voting systems, although right now where I want to harness attention is on the next 9 days, including what is happening Tuesday the 6th, what is happening on Election Day. But I think a conversation with the big sort politically, I don't call it polarization. I don't see exactly polls, but with the big sort geographically, with the big sort racially, with the big sort ideologically, it is harder and harder to have a first past the post system as constructed yield results. I think working at the local level to transform how systems can work, to broaden the conversation makes a heck of a lot of sense, including voting systems that are kind of like approval voting, which sounds like relatively similar or maybe exactly the same as what you're talking about, where you can click yes on the people you like and no on the people you don't, is one way of doing it. In fact, star voting is on the ballot right now in Eugene, Oregon, little town, happens to be the town I went to college, and at that, in that system, you'd actually, it's sort of like Yelp. You'd give 5 stars to candidates you really like, 2 stars who you didn't, and then the one with the most stars would win. Do we have another time for another phone call? Let's take Rudy. It's beyond Donald Trump. A lot of people think like him, says Rudy from Atlanta. Rudy, go ahead.
Hey, man, you are really doing a good job. You're really Yeah, you're
Thanks,
a good
man.
relief pitcher. Let's say that.
Appreciate
Hey,
that.
yeah, but you know, Donald Trump is. It's a lot of people that what's the word I would like to use? Obnoxious, just like him, that think like him, that have no regard for no one else's feelings but their own. And you know, you call it a movement. I call it ideology. It's a lot of people that think like that.
Yeah.
And it's on the rise. And you got a guy that's the president, and you know, those people are just attracted to that. You can call it a cult, but there are a lot of people that think like that. I mean, and
I agree.
Them and here's the thing, you know, over the holidays here, we need to start. We have to find creative ways to confront these people in our family, because every a group of race of people have them in their family. We have to stop, you know, just saying, hey, you know, he just being crazy, or no. That's the problem.
That's just Uncle Bill. That's just how Uncle Bill talks.
Yeah, man. We got to cut that out. We got to bring these people back into the fold and start making them think right, because if we keep saying, hey, y'all, they just sick, they just, you know, no. It's time that we stop saying that our loved ones are just crazy or they have problems.
Amen, Rudy. And stay on the phone. Let me stay on the phone. Let me reply to this real quick, to both of the things that you said. So the first one, which is it's not just Trump, it's a bunch of people. And by the way, that includes too many moments, me, myself, and my friends as a younger man. And it is not only a movement, it is not only a cult, it is also cultural realities in far too many lives. And I totally agree with you. And the second thing is, I have been at a dinner. I had two experiences. Shame on me for one of them. Not quite shame on me for the other one. That one of my uncles would say stuff that I'm not going to say on the radio, and I would not disagree strenuously enough. Maybe to my credit, I had my share of arguments with my uncle. I'm not going to say his name. It wouldn't be very nice. Maybe I should. I don't know. But we would have some pretty strange. But other times, oh, well, that's just Uncle John. I don't want to ruin this particular Thanksgiving. You're probably right that either we got to be willing to ruin Thanksgiving, and if I'm invited back before Thanksgiving, I might have a chance to talk to Brain Coach Brad, who has some really interesting thoughts on how to engage people, including people who are close to you, when you disagree. How do you make sure you listen, validate humanity, but not tolerate things that are super contra to your values? I really appreciate both points. You got a last thought, Rudy?
Hey, man, that's just what it's all about. There's no more kicking these people to the side and just saying, oh, you know, we need to find creative ways to make people see that their way of thinking is not productive to society. And this is going on way too long in our society, and we just need to find ways to stop it, because it's killing us.
Amen. The thing that seemed to work some of the time, and I think it's probably one of the tools, I think the biggest thing is just having good motives and acting upon those motives. There's probably lots of actions. I'm trying not to critique different types of activism. I think more activism is what we need, even if it's not always the type I might engage in. Keep it peaceful, but generally speaking, we need more rather than just exactly the perfect thing. But one of the things that we would do that would seem to work is if somebody went over the line, is we would tease them mercilessly. And to me, the thing that's a little too bad is there aren't enough people being teased mercilessly for their views. When we make fun of somebody, if they said something was a little off, you know, we could tease them about being a KKK member, get everybody laughing, and then they were the person that wasn't getting cultural approval, and at least helping set the tone in our friend circle. More of us can do that with our families. More of us can do that in our workplaces. We can help fight back against misogyny and racism. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. The call-in number is 202-808-9925. We're on with Bill, Free Speech TV from Ocean View, Delaware. I think. Bill, how you doing?
Doing fine. How about you?
Holding up.
Yeah, that's the name of the game. Yeah, quick question. I see, I call him Donnie because he's 6 months younger than me, going to all these rallies with the Yahoo, Rahoo kind of audience he has, which are totally entertained by him. The thing I would like to know, and I'm sure it's been answered several times over, but I never see it on mass media. Who's picking up the tab for this rally, 2, 3, 4 rallies a week, this week and next week? Who is paying?
Yeah, we got a similar question earlier, and Bill, thanks for the call. And by the way, the call-in number is 202-808-9925. But I can give a little bit better answer because in between I did a little extra research, a little bit of extra research, but just to get a little more specific. So, for example, the answer I gave, or sort of what I already know, is that the stuff that is government stuff gets paid for by the government, by the taxpayer. The stuff that is campaign stuff gets paid for by the campaign. In operation, that can be a little tricky. So to answer your question on the rally specifically, here's an example, and shout out to a local Minnesota outlet for doing the arithmetic. When he did a rally in Minneapolis, they did the math. It cost taxpayers $155,000 for that rally for the added security. That was paid for by the government, as I understand it. The rally in Phoenix cost more than $450,000. I don't know, and I'm checking to see if the security gets billed back to the campaign. I should know that already, but I'm going to have to research that. But generally, if there's state duties while they're there, that stuff gets segregated. And usually somebody does a cost segregation report, as I understand it, to the stuff that's government stuff gets paid for by the government, and the stuff that's campaign stuff gets paid for by the campaign. But since two people have asked that question, I'm going to get even more detailed on it, I hope, before we wrap at noon today. Kent from YouTube, Cleveland, Ohio. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
I'm with you. I'm better now.
Yeah. I just wanted to say a couple of things. The division, in our country, it reminds me a lot of the 1880s in like the coal camps. They would have separated people by race and ethnicity, and blame the Italians, blame the blacks, just so they wouldn't put them together and realize who was really screwing them over, who was the whole company CEO. And it almost seems by design, not to be too much of a conspiracy theorist, it almost seems by design that the same thing kind of happening now. So we don't focus on the 1% and the corporations who are.
Again, all conspiracy means is people in secret agreeing on something to harm somebody else. It happens literally every day. Conspiracy does not mean false. There are false conspiracy theories, and there are true ones. All theory means theory also doesn't mean false. In fact, it means having some evidence in fact, is something north of a hypothesis. Whether it is intentional or not, what is absolutely happening in the country? I mean, there is not a majority of the people in this country who want to gut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. There's not a majority in this country who want to focus tax cuts at the upper incomes. There's not a majority of people in this country who want to make sure that people can have the biggest firearm they can unabated. There are not majorities for that. You've got to divide and conquer in order to conquer, if those are your views. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. With us now, Luke Vargas, Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. Luke, what's going on? What new information? We've already reported here, or at least pass along reporting here, that the suspect has been taken into custody. That he's a registered Republican. That he had Trump stickers on his van. He hasn't been convicted of anything, to be clear. That there have now been 11 pipe bombs sent, or is it 12? What else do we need to know? What are you covering?
Well, I am covering this story insofar as I am on the group messaging board with the rest of my colleagues who are working on the story. They seem to be saying that, well, let's just say this. At 2:30, the Department of Justice will give a formal update on this. And I think until then, I at least will hesitate on passing along information that I can't quite, ascertain its provenance. This is not really my beat. So let's just leave it there with your permission. I think what I've been focusing on today are events overseas, which often get quite buried as we get swept up.
You're saying the world is still relevant? The pipe bombs are mailed, and nonetheless, the world is still relevant? How dare you, sir? How dare you?
One thing I've been looking at with some interest is that the Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, whom many folks think might be on his way out, there have been some reports that the likes of
everybody's getting fired after the election. That's a mild exaggeration, but everybody's getting fired after the election.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like John Bolton may be responsible for circulating reports to the press suggesting that Mattis is on the way out, that we have some palace intrigue here where, Bolton and some of his ilk seem to think Mattis is an annoyance and that Trump could replace him with someone who will, let's say, go a little bit harder on Iran, if that's possible to do in the current environment. And yet, what it appears Mattis is going to do, even though some of us may view him as sort of the rational savior in a world of Trump tumult, is he's going to give a speech tomorrow in Bahrain, which is a very, very close ally of Saudi Arabia. And according to embargoed bits of that speech, he is going to basically say that if the U.S. questions in any way our relationship with Saudi Arabia, that we're going to create a very dangerous political vacuum in the Middle East, and that Russia will sweep in and fill that vacuum. I think that, one completely overstates Russia's power to be able to be an ally, anything like the U.S. has been in the Middle East, and seems to be in exact conformity with the kind of pro-status quo policies towards Saudi Arabia that the U.S. has embraced in Democratic and Republican administrations for decades. So again, if you thought for a moment that the Khashoggi killing, the subsequent cover-up, and everything else that's been abhorrent about the Saudi reaction to this is going to prompt a major rethink of this alliance in Washington, I think Mattis's comments suggest otherwise, that, we're not just going to hype or overhype or misstate the jobs impact of that relationship. We are actually going to actively sort of talk up what would happen if we dared question this? And Mattis really seems to be implying we'd be leaving a very, very dangerous situation if we rethought this relationship. I'm eager to hear these remarks, but they don't bode well as to a possible sort of shift in policy here.
So let me make sure I've got the he said correct. So sure. The Mattis has been viewed as maybe on the out, certainly in some conflict with John Bolton. I think we have this mythology that they're the good Trump people that will save us. That's not how I see the world. I don't see a lot of facts that bear it up, but somebody's willing to post an anonymous op-ed to that effect. And what you're saying is that Mattis's comments were instead just saying sort of the same old line of, no, we need the Saudis because we need a bulwark in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I would say, I agree with you that trying to draw some sort of line separating out the rational good Trump figures and the unhinged bad ones is a little bit of a complicated task. What I would say, and maybe not one worth even engaging in, but what is, I think, something we can see pretty clearly is a difference in the caliber of person who was brought into the administration early on, when I think, Trump's base instincts were still pretty clear to a lot of people, but he hadn't done a whole lot of specific harm in office yet. And I don't think you would get people like Mattis, Tillerson, Nikki Haley now. I think those were people who were willing to take a bet on their careers, and that's probably why some of them have moved on to other things. I mean, I was listening to Nikki Haley at the UN Security Council on Wednesday when they were hearing testimony about genocide in Myanmar. I mean, she was giving these quotes from John Adams about pesky facts and things like that. And I said, you're not going to find a new hire to the role of UN ambassador who, no matter what the issue, is going to go in front of the world and talk about how much the U.S. values facts. I mean, any replacement to her at this point is not going to be in her model. And so I think the same is true of Mattis, even if it's a stretch to say that, perhaps he's one of the good ones. But I do think you are a lot of that type of talent that came in early on, you're just going to get different people now who probably are okay with a short-term stint in this administration and care less about rejoining, I don't know, serious foreign policy circles after their time in the White House.
And what do you think? We only got about 40 seconds left, but
sure.
What do you think should happen, Luke Vargas from Talk Media News, talkmenews.com? How should the United States be reacting to Saudi Arabia? Is Mattis wrong, or is the administration wrong that alliance is important? Should we withdraw from the Middle East because we've only made the things worse? Or is constructive engagement, given our still need for oil, something that we should be engaged in? What do you think? Or if you just want to quote someone else, feel free of doing that.
Well, the oil is 5% of our imports. That's not giant, and Saudi Arabia is a huge purchaser of our military arms. But overall, engagement with that country is still relatively low compared with others. And I would say you can still have constructive engagement, but not just be willing to do anything for your ally. And let's use that military trade as leverage on our side, not the other way around.
Luke Vargas, thanks so much for being with us, man.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend. We're going to be right back. It's not the weekend yet, and we're going to be talking about one of the biggest things happening in media right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. Even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won. Education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner that people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools, improved environments, workplace collective bargaining, and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Breaking Through Power, it's easier than we think.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff. Who will tell the people? Bill Grider posed that question in his 1990s book about the betrayal of democracy. If we want to understand what's going on, who will help us understand? If Princeton is correct, not the university, but the professors who published their paper, that the United States has drifted from democracy to oligarchy, and if oligarchs control the means of communication, who will challenge oligarchy? Who will help us understand what is going on? Who will tell the people? One answer that was posed in Britain was public television and public media. It was posed here too. Very American. People love their Sesame Street. That included community media. That included cable access. That included making sure that when a cable bill was passed that allowed cable companies huge profits across the country, that they would also spend a little bit of that money to make sure that people in that community also had access to the media, and it was the birth of community cable. Prior to that, you'd had the birth of the Pacifica Radio Network. On the phone right now is Mike Weisner. I hope I'm getting the name right. To talk to us about who will tell the people and one of the biggest things happening in the media right now and what this FCC under the Trump administration is trying to do. Sir, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. First of all, introduce yourself and the work you're doing. And I put it in some context, but I might have done it unfairly or inaccurately.
It's okay. You know, community media is a longstanding tradition in the United States, both radio stations that have been around since the 1940s. And actually, you see a whole bunch of new radio stations that have popped up that are locally based, community-oriented commercial stations all across the country, big and small. I work in community video, community television, and we have literally thousands of channels around the United States that are locally based. Either they're based in public, educational, or government settings, and they're devoted to local stories, local issues, local content in a way that you can't get from a large commercial service or an international commercial service.
So these are places like in my town, Open Signal or Metro East Community Media. They're like the public access stations across the country. And by the way, a lot of people watching this program on Free Speech TV might be watching on a station like that.
That's right. And I think the thing that's important to note is that these stations were codified by the 1984 Cable Act. They've been serving local communities for decades, providing them with day-to-day, week-to-week information about how government works, what's going on in local city and county councils, what's going on in their political races.
They might air the county council meetings in full.
Exactly. And here in 2018, as well, there's a lot of discussion about what's happening with the national races in the House and the Senate. When it comes to what's happening with local races in, say, for example, your state house or with your city or county council, there's nothing in after community, with the exception of channels like ours that are actually devoted specifically to providing information about what's happening in local government for community members. That's the reason why the channels were set up. They're also set up to make sure that people have education that comes from local educational institutions like community colleges and public schools, and that people have the ability to communicate with each other. That's why public access channels were set up in the United States.
So Mike, give you more just really present personal examples. The first media thing I ever did was help on a Beyond War television show. I didn't help very skillfully. I was I think in middle school, and my younger brother right now, one of his jobs, he works too, but one of his jobs is running video for a successful local artist. And now I do a bunch of stuff in media. It helps train people to do stuff as well as cover stuff that's it's covering local stuff.
Well, I think that's right. I think it's actually a media diversity success story that you see in public educational and government access television, because these are training grounds for people who want to do creative things. They may not be in New York City or Los Angeles. They may be in small towns all across America, but they have a desire to be able to communicate with others, to use their skills, to be able to build skills and in many cases build a career. So that thing you're talking about, that youth media experience that happens at a public school or perhaps in a community setting after school at a public access center, has a lot of impact on the creative community in many, many states across the country. And actually we see sort of case after case of people who got their start in community access media, either on the public radio side or in the commercial television side. And it's actually one of the success stories of our media system, that we actually have the ability to be able to have people in small towns across the country, and maybe they're in media markets that are larger than that, but they actually may not have power. They may not have the inside track to be able to get into, say, a CBS or an NBC Universal. The system actually allows...
It's right. So it's allowed a lot of coverage. It's allowed access not only to information, but also to the means of communication, to learning those means. What is happening right now? What's the FCC trying to do right now? As I understand it, they're trying to change the rules that a lot of this stuff is funded. It's almost entirely funded by cable franchise fees. And the cable companies have been lobbying to change that and are having a little more success now. Please explain.
Well, what's happening right now is the FCC is trying to redefine the balance between local communities and industry by tipping the scale toward industry. And specifically, they're trying to make sure that industry gets breaks, that the use of public property to be able to make money, the cable franchise that local communities give out, is tipped in the balance so that the public property that a cable company has to use to be able to get to your home.
They don't own all that land. They need to get an easement to, or get some other permission to be able to run all that cable. They're not just going over the airwaves.
Right. They actually need to get a license to be able to get to your home or to get to your apartment building. And the community owns the property to be able to go through the entire community itself, right? So the public rights of way are controlled by local communities. One of the things that was enshrined in the 1984 Cable Act was that local franchise fee and that local support could be gotten by local communities from the cable industry to be able to make money by having cable channels go to your home. Now, what's happening right now is the FCC is trying to tip the balance and say that cable company is not making enough money. Kind of state that again for you, Jeff. The cable company is not making enough money.
They're having a real hard time. I very often, in fact, I've been starting to send money a little bit each month to the cable company because I'm worried about them. Oh, wait, no, I do that. It's called my cable bill. It's expensive. It's a lot more expensive than my community media memberships that I'm grateful to be able to play.
And I think, let's give you one example.
We got like a minute, so I want to make sure the most important stuff gets out.
So the most important thing to know is that what the FCC is specifically looking to change the rules by which we define what a franchise fee is and what other kind of support for community media is. And it will endanger the ability for local communities to actually have these channels. The thing that we're really fearful of in the rulemaking that's going to be happening this fall is that the FCC will actually redefine what support is allowed, and we actually will see these channels disappear. It's a terrible thing.
Right, and so you have these community media outlets, one of the only outlets that actually gives access to the media that's not controlled by Mark Zuckerberg or by media oligarch, and people have a chance to use them. That is part of the deal for them using the public right of way, and they're trying to change it so that instead of giving money, they can say, well, we'll let you use the channel instead, but we're going to charge you for the channel, and they wouldn't be able to afford that. They'd go out of business. When's the rulemaking happening? When can people find out more? We got 5 seconds.
The rulemaking is happening this fall. You can find out at our website, allcommunitymedia.org.
Mike, thank you so much for your work. You're doing wonderful stuff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Is Mike still? Mike, you still with us?
Yeah.
Mike is gone. He's there. Mike, you're still with us. Give a last thought. If I cut you off too quickly, we're now on with the Free Speech TV audience. Some of those who are listening on watching on the very cable channels that you're talking about. What would you ask people to do before I go to the next caller?
people need to contact their local elected officials to let them know that media diversity is important and that they need to fight for the right to have these channels in their communities. So contact your mayors and your county councils right now and all throughout the fall to get them involved in this battle.
And one of the reasons we thought, and I personally thought this was important enough to spend time on, I really appreciate you spending time on it, even in the run-up to an election, is this thing is happening this fall. If we wait through the holidays, it will be over, and all of a sudden there will have been a quiet erosion of access to the media all over the country. Plug your website again.
It's All Community Media, ALL communitymedia.org.
allcommunitymedia.org. Thanks for fighting for all community media, Mike.
I'm happy to do it, Jeff.
Take care. All right, let's go to Howard, who is in the running for the Most Patient Award, calling from Mapleton. What's up, Howard?
Yes, this is I. I was always wondering why our government couldn't be changed to where we have an up and down vote on anything the president or Congress or even the Supreme Court does on a twice-a-year basis, so that if a lot of this stuff that does not go along with mankind's betterment or betterability or whatever, that we could say, all right, we disapprove. And then by disapproving, by voting it down, it changes, it gives the voting right back to the voter, not to the Congress and all those that's been elected. I
want to make sure I'm understanding, Howard. Are you suggesting I may be missing your suggestion. You might be suggesting that we have a national referendum system, a chance to have direct democracy, or do you mean something else?
I'm meaning that. I mean in direct democracy in which people have the right to approve before anything can be enacted or not enacted. It's like, a lot of people say abortion's wrong and they are against it. But I myself say it's wrong, but then again, for my Christian values. But I realize that a lot of children would be brought into this world that would not have loving parents and loving, support from the people. And they would be like secondhand citizens and so forth, and they wouldn't have a very good life. I think that the voters should take back their rights, because like in the city I live in we've got a Congress, city council. They vote in thing after a time, and they get all out of sort, and then they keep coming back to fundamentals. We don't have money for education or for our roads.
And I do, Howard, want to get to your central point, reply to your central point, which is about we've got just a few seconds, but is about direct democracy. To me, we are raising the question about our overall system of government that relies upon proxies, people who will spend their time working on the issues, advocating for our values, and trying to do the smartest thing, presumably because they have a little more time to do it. And hopefully that helps them develop a little bit of expertise. I tend to be a small d Democrat. I think that there are opportunities to get more input in how we do things, even open source government in some respects. But in doing it, we got to make sure that the same systems that are corrupting our politics don't corrupt those politics too, which is why we need to work on the media, work on campaign finance reform, and work on wealth disparities, and go to this break. It's Friday. It is the Friday before the penultimate the penultimate weekend before the election. There are 2 weekends left. If you want to canvass, if you want to phone bank, what does canvass mean? It means go to door to door. Door to door to door to door to door to door. Which, by the way, when Yale did the study, demonstrated was the single biggest thing that had an impact on increasing a person's likelihood of voting, was face-to-face, human-to-human contact. First time I voted, my buddy Trevor, it was voting day. It was the last election day in Oregon before we were all vote by mail. And he said, Jeff, you voted yet? I was like, no. I was a political science major. I thought I was supposed to vote. I didn't consider myself lazy. I didn't consider myself apathetic. I just hadn't voted yet. And I said, no. He said, come on. I got in his truck. We went down and voted. That Trevor Albee saying it to me was why I voted. You want to say it to more people? You got a couple chances. This weekend is one. And for early voting, there and in states that have a lot of vote by mail, some would argue this is the most important weekend. So let me put a sharper point upon it. If you think that we need to be at the nadir of the current American conversation, if this needs not to be a lamp that gets even more wishes, a wish that includes a get out of jail free card, a wish that includes more Supreme Court justices, a wish that includes more gaps in wealth, more wishes that include further voter suppression, more wishes that include eroding people's health care and making it so that people, if they have a pre-existing condition, have a real hard time finding insurance that almost anyone could afford. If you think this needs to be the nadir of the American conversation, you might then also think that this is the most important midterm election of your lifetime, most important congressional election of your lifetime, the most important state legislative election of your lifetime if you live in a place that has a legislature, which is all of you who are living in the United States, who is going to be going through redistricting after the 2020 census, and those legislatures are going to determine the maps, they're going to determine the Congress for the next decade, which will help determine if the war on democracy is successful. If you think, if you have your own theory, which is more than a hypothesis, that this is the most important election, and if you think that the best way to win elections is to get more people voting, if the best way to make democracy work is for more people to do it, and if you work during the week, so the weekends are your best time, and if you are in an early voting place, which means that a bunch of people will have voted before the last weekend, and I'll go further, if you believe this is one of the most important countries in the world, that the democratic experiment in this country has implications beyond our borders and for so many people inside those borders and people wanting to come, then you can make an argument this is the most important weekend in the history of the world. What are you going to do this weekend? William wants to talk from Louisiana about Louisiana elections. William, what are you doing this weekend? What are you up to?
I voted early yesterday, Jefferson.
Thanks for doing it.
For my Louisiana, the 6th district, his name is Justin DeWitt, and he's a hardworking, honest fella, and we can get rid of Garrett Graves, who wants to take away our health care. And Justin and his husband have already received a bunch of death threats, but they stayed in the race anyway, and so he's the first openly gay candidate to run in Louisiana, and we're real proud of him for that. And
plug his website. Love plugging the local races. Plug the website. Or just say the name again so people can look it up on their search engine.
Okay, Justin DeWitt for Congress.com.
Justin DeWitt. William, thank you so much for calling in. Rob, calling on healthcare from Guy Mills, PA.
Yeah. Both parties equaled 140 million people that voted, and 144 million are going to have their health care destroyed, altered, diminished, or something with cost rising 33 to 50%. That it happened as soon as President altered the medical care laws. The GOP is suing so that basically none of the major conditions that kill you have to be covered. These people hate health care for the poor, and it's like they got a mental illness itself. And I don't care what the cost is, but I think it's time that it's got to be done. And I offer a Medicare super coverage policy that is 100% coverage at zero additional cost to people.
You're offering it as a policy proposal, or that's what you're in business to do?
No, I'm running for president against Trump.
Oh, I apologize, Rob. I missed that part.
I've been doing this stuff for 40 years, and I know exactly what I'm talking about.
You've been running for president for 40 years? You've been working on a health care policy for 40 years?
No, I've been working in the back of the government and as a lawyer and stuff like that for 40 years. The GOP has fought health care since Jimmy Carter. And it's like, how long are we going to do this? Our nation is sick. We need to get healed. We need to get our people doing the best we can. We need to innovate. We need to move forward.
Rob, thank you so much for calling and focusing on healthcare. There's a reason that, they're sending troops to the border for a caravan that's 1,000 miles away on foot. They're not anywhere close. They're sitting there, they're hoping to draw cameras because they want somehow the election to be about some people wanting asylum from Central America rather than millions, maybe a few hundred that might actually be granted asylum, rather than millions and millions and millions of people who absolutely will get sick, and the tens and tens of millions of people who might be those people, we just don't know it. And the millions among them who can't afford it, and the impact that that could have on those families, and by the way, on also the people that don't get sick. Because whether we figure out a way, an expensive way to pay for it at emergency rooms, or we don't pay for it, or people go bankrupt, you're thinking about what's going to pop this economic balloon, and I don't just mean a 1,000-point drop in the stock market. I mean a real problem. Healthcare bankruptcies might be our worst threat. We want to focus on what really matters. Think about your neighbor. Love thy neighbor. Help thy neighbor. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We love you. We're going to be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program, and we love doing this with you.
Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away. The government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared the era of big government is over. The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, from Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We just made a relatively persuasive case. This is one of the most important weekends in the history of humankind. Wow. That sounds important. What are you going to do this weekend? Call-in number here is 202-808-9925. You got something you're going to do this weekend, you can share it with us. 202-808-9925. It is anything goes on Friday. Let's have some of that stuff go. We're going to try to do lightning round to see how many people we go through. If you ask me yes or no questions, we'll get through more. If you want to say a quick statement and move along without me responding, we can do that too. If you need me to answer something, I'll do my best. Let's go to Dina, listening on YouTube, I suppose also watching from Washington. La Connor, I think. Go ahead, Dina.
Hi, this might be kind of a dumb question. I hope not. The economy is something I have a very basic understanding of at best. So I just take you guys' words for it. But I'm always trying to find things I can take to Republican voters that I think they'd actually listen to, like the economy. And I've never heard anyone compare unregulated capitalism to a monopoly game.
Keep going.
Is that not appropriate?
It is appropriate. The makers of the game, it was, as I recall, it was the Monopoly game was borrowed from another game that was that it ended up glorifying landlording, but it was actually supposed to do the opposite of glorifying landlording. But what's the particular, rather than me making the connection, what's the particular connection you're wanting to make or at least investigate?
The outcome.
Yeah. Somebody wins. Everybody else is out of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dina. I think you understand the economy as well as anybody else does.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll start using that. Thank you.
Have a good weekend. Robin, civil informationing for political organizing from Kingston, Washington. Speak your piece.
Yeah, I mean, if you want me to ask you a question right away, I can do that. But I just want to introduce the audience again to the concept of civil informationing, which is something I came up with in 2002 in Reno. And it's a different tool in the bag of activism. We understand civil disobedience, civil resistance, which are both sort of negative or reactionary. Civil informationing has got to do with your civic duty as a citizen, and then civil behavior and how we deal with people and connect with them. And the informationing part is that you collect your own information, not from oligarch media, but your own way, share it with others, and then you talk, share, grow, organize locally. And then from that, we have political power trickling upward constantly. It's a do-it-yourself program. And it's completely opposite of the big event-only activism, which is the breeding ground of 60s, 70s activism, and also the residual effects of it going on right now with those who organize. So the question that I would have to ask you, Jefferson, is simple. Which would you prefer? Okay, would you prefer 1 million-person march, or would you prefer 1,000,000 one-person marches? That's my question that you can answer. I'll take it off the air. And then the other major point of view is, as soon as the left stops arguing with fools, those people who have authoritative personalities, those people who are the Limbaugh, Fox News, Trump, Tea Party, ditto.
Understood. You just fuel them.
Stop arguing those, and then we just take our time to have communications with 60 to 65% of the people who are actually progressive and thoughtful and who has evidence shapes their opinion. As soon as we stop arguing,
if you share facts with people who aren't going to be persuaded by facts, you have a question about whether you're wasting your time. I tend to think that there are more persuadable people than most political consultants seem to think, but I think it takes a while, and I think it takes a while. To respond also to your thought about civil informationing, it's a new term to me, so I don't know that I'll respond aptly, but I will go a little bit further, at least in this respect, that much of modern activist culture was built in the industrial age. The Mario Savio line, well after that, saying at some point you got to throw your body under the gears of the machine. The idea of the industrial machine is the thing that was moving, and the worker strike is the thing that could block it. In an information age, it is not the means of production that are at risk or being purchased. It is the means of communication. The most powerful companies now, more powerful than the trusts 100 years ago, the most powerful companies now are Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, and Microsoft should be included as a fifth. They are information companies. They control the means of information. Activism that is only physical, that is not also informational, that doesn't understand that we are engaged in a conversation that needs to be made a little bit better rather than a lot worse, I think is misunderstanding both the big and the small picture. So I'll at least agree with you in that respect. Montgomery, Alabama, Norma, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. One of the things that I wanted people to be aware of when they go to vote, you need to be thinking about who is going to be the governor in the state. Because as these groups like the Heritage Corporation, ELEC, the Federalist Society, they have been putting their people into offices from every level, from your city council on up. But when you think about these governors' races, they have in the background a new constitution, and they want to call a constitutional convention, and it is your governor who's going to be voting on that. We, the people, may not even see a constitution until it's already ratified.
Amen, Norma.
Sir?
I just said amen. Preach, keep going.
Okay. But like I said, we could lose every right we have, and this is why it is very important to get everybody to go vote. And to make, here in Alabama, we had over 50,000 people kicked off the voter rolls in District 3.
Yep.
And most people don't even know that. But people need to be checking to make sure you're still on the voter rolls. And voting registration here in Alabama is closed, and we don't have same-day registration like other states do.
And we can connect those dots, Norma, that it is those governors who sign the bills that do voter suppression, is the governors that, and sometimes it's just Secretary of States who can do it through regulatory fashion, but almost always if there is and also when it comes to redistricting, governors play enormously important roles in most states when it comes to drawing district lines after the census. So you're right, and whether we're talking Stacey Abrams in the South or Gillum in Florida, or whether we're talking about Kate Brown in Oregon, or governors in between those two faraway states, I totally appreciate your call. Colleen on 103.7 in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Hello. Hi. I am a Medicare, Medicaid, just generalized insurance nurse, case manager.
Thank you.
And what is upsetting, and it's a statement, is when you sit with family members and the senior citizen and having to discuss with the family as far as placement for their parents. And with Social Security as their prime bonding, people need to stop and think. Do I have to live on Social Security? Why is Congress cutting the Social Security, the Medicare, and the Medicaid benefits? Stop and think about what before you go out and vote, what is entitled to a lot of our senior citizens.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Appreciate your call. Rob, listening on TuneIn from Phoenix, Arizona. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hey, in order to combat the Republican death by 1,000 cuts war on the middle class, we need to start demanding more from our legislators. Like, for instance, like the provisional ballots, we should have laws either statewide or preferably nationwide that say that anyone who receives a provisional ballot gets a follow-up, either email or letter that says whether their vote was counted or not, because we need to keep this alive. People need to know if their vote counted or not. And we should also raise the bar and be just outraged if even one person is denied the right to vote who is legally, able to vote, especially those who have voted.
And I want to pile on. Only somebody who's anti-Democrat, and I mean anti-small d, not anti-big D, but they presumably are both, if they are, that an anti-Democrat, only somebody who is opposed to democracy would think that the bigger problem is making sure that 1 or 2 or 17 out of millions extra votes were cast. They should worry a lot about anybody who didn't have their chance to vote, didn't have their franchise. Amen.
Absolutely. We got to change that, the narrative around on that and just be outraged if one person, because they have found people who have done it, but it was, through they didn't know that because they were a felon, they shouldn't have voted. So nothing that's happened in the past would have changed any election.
I'm adding that to my list. I'm keeping a list of stuff that hadn't occurred to me sufficiently. I had an old professor who said, when you learn something is the first time you say to yourself, I knew that all the time. But the first time you say that to yourself, that's when you really learned it. And that just happened to be. I'd seen a tweet a little while ago. I think a Thom Hartmann listener who was decrying the current media conversation and how much focus the New York Times, for instance, was putting on Trump voters still. Here's a Trump voter. And in fact, I think it was in response to, here's in the wake of another Kanye dust up, here's a black person who's a Trump supporter, and interviewing that person and said, why aren't they interviewing people who have been denied the ability to vote? Why aren't there a series of exposés on the work that people are doing to, in fact, cast their ballot, the lines they're waiting in, the things they're doing to make sure that their vote isn't robbed from them? Why aren't those the exposés we're doing? And Rob, your call is getting added to my list of the things I learned by doing this show. Thank you so much for calling in. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We're going to be back in just a little bit for the final throws. We still have got time for a few more calls. 202-808-9925. 202-808-9925. Big weekend coming up. What are you doing for the weekend?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Listen to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We got good stuff coming up. John from Chicago, Illinois. You're on Free Speech TV and on the Thom Hartmann Show. Go ahead.
Hi there. There's something I noticed a lot and between Democrats and Republicans is both of them are always in agreement, bipartisan, on war. And it just aggravates me thinking that we spend nearly $1 trillion on war each year, and then we still have these discussions about we can't afford universal health care for people. Well, cut back military spending, stop using the 20-year excuse of 9/11 that we're going to be harmed in such a way. I mean, I don't understand that whole concept of government spending being that high when our closest so-called enemy, Russia and China, spend barely 50 to 70 million on their war budget.
So I want to agree and I want to quibble. I agree that there is not a major political party that has as its platform being a pacifist. That is empirically true. I also want to agree that anytime somebody says that government should be run as a business, I don't know of any business that spends the lion's share of its discretionary budget on its night watchman. There are various ways I would agree. The quibble is, I think it is a significant overstatement to say that there aren't disagreements between Republicans in the main and Democrats in the main around applications of military force. I think that even in Iraq, even when there was the run-up with supermajority support, not only among the people in power, but also among voters in the United States after the media that was fed to them, that there are still lots of examples of strong differences of views on defense spending and applications of military force. Are you overstating it all, or am I missing the point?
No, you're sounding pretty right on. It's just one of those things that's difficult to comprehend, like how we're sheltered, at least mainstream media shelters us from real issues about war, and they don't even bring up anything about budgets and how we can distribute money in different ways.
I'll add something else, John. Thank you, and thank you for calling. I'll add something else. I think about it. I'm gonna relate it to water policy, which is you're gonna think is strange. But working on water policy, something that I've noticed is that you have lots of urban Democrats who under-prioritize water policy, and too many or too few rural Republicans who are willing to regulate or pay for it. And so there ends up being this void. Similarly, I think with military spending, that you have lots of humanities majors, like small L and big L liberals, who are involved in activist circles and don't nerd out on how the military is spending its money. They'll be ready if there is an invasion saying, no, don't invade Iraq. But they're not figuring out if I know this because I have a buddy of mine named Jason who nerds out on this stuff. And he's a pretty liberal guy, but he's really interested in military equipment and boondoggles that happen in the military. But you end up having Republicans who generally thump and say, hey, let's do it, and Democrats who avoid it a little bit. And so there ends up being this gap in really understanding how this stuff is working. And so I appreciate you raising that in our brains a little bit more. Kevin, you got time for a very quick question. Kevin, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. My question is in regard to the man who was discharged with mail bombs. Is there any way that Trump could be indicted for inciting this person to do what he did?
Good question. I'll take two very quick answers. Trump would say no. That's why Kavanaugh matters. But I'm going to pick that up again after this break. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We're in the final stretch. We appreciate you. Hey, everybody. It's almost the weekend. I hope you have plans. And maybe your plans include democracy. I got a question a moment ago about whether or not the president could be indicted. They were thinking in terms of the pipe bombing. That the answer to that question is almost certainly no. That crying fire in a crowded theater still is it's hard to prove causation to then if somebody gets trampled that it is the fault that a given person who calls fires, it's their fault that somebody gets injured. But this was not even that. Even if you could prove it, this was even further removed from that. So I don't want to go that far. But it does raise another question is, can the president be indicted at all? There is a major debate as to that question. And if one agrees with Oliver Wendell Holmes, who says what a judge will do is all I mean by law, then you understand that the answer to the question of whether or not the president could be indicted is relatively similar to the question of, should Brett Kavanaugh be on the Supreme Court? Because that question might well get to the Supreme Court. And Newt Gingrich said just this week, was it yesterday? That, well, if there's a subpoena for Trump's tax records, then we'll find out if the Kavanaugh fight was worth it. Charles, you got something to say about Fox News from Opelika, Florida. It might be Opelika.
Yeah, definitely Opelika.
Opelika, go ahead.
And unfortunately, that's where some of the mail was sent to, where the FBI was.
Got it.
You know, right. My thing is this, though. Basically, I just don't want us to whimper out. And what I mean by that is because, as a Democrat, I've been disappointed in our leadership. We haven't been taking advantage of opportunities that's been given to us with this very divisive president.
For instance,
just the other day when he blurted out, you know, there are Muslims in the caravan or Middle Easterners in the caravan, and you know they have MS-13. Then I'm like, well, then why isn't Schumer or Pelosi coming out and say, well, if they are, I think you should go get them right now, you know, while they're in Central America before they even get here.
I appreciate it, Charles. I appreciate it. And I got two answers to your question. The first relates to something that Tom says also, that generally we put too much agency, put too much of our onus on elected officials to control what's happening in the media, when, with the exception of the president, most elected officials have relatively little purchase with what ends up on TV, in the radio, in internet feeds. And so anytime I hear somebody say, well, I wish the Democrats would just say blank, almost, if not every time, but almost every time I can find a Democrat who did say that very thing. But they said it to a couple hundred people, or they tweeted it to a few thousand people, or got retweeted to some tens of thousands of people, but not to millions and millions repeated times. The other, though, is you raise a more specific question is why didn't in this instance, they say, okay, well, put up or shut up. Trump, we think you're bluffing. We don't think there are Muslims there. If you think that there are terrorists there, Muslims are not terrorists. Those are different things. But if you think there are criminals there, go investigate. Part of the challenge is it feeds the story. That if Trump gets to call the tune, the bully pulpit of today is not the bully pulpit to talk all the time. It's to be the first mover to garner the attention of the electronic hordes. And if we feed into it, if he says, oh, if we respond to everything he says, and sometimes we've got to, sometimes we shouldn't. And that's a question of judgment. It can be a hard decision to make. Those are my two answers to your good question. I appreciate it, Charles. Mark, about the Supreme Court, you're going to be just about our last caller. We might be able to get somebody else. Go ahead.
Yeah, about the Supreme Court. You know, when are we going to hold the Supreme Court accountable for basically being able to buy a politician, thus having a party that sold out the country and basically runs on hate and fear because it has nothing for the American people?
I appreciate it, Mark. And let me just say this. When are we going to hold the Supreme Court accountable? I don't know. I think there is going to be a more robust conversation around either expanding, and don't say packing. The court already got packed. It got packed by the Republicans over the last 10 years, or the last 20. But I think there will be a more robust conversation about expanding the court or adding term limits to the court. About saying, yeah, lifetime appointment. How about 12 years? You'll still be pretty well shielded and with no chance for re-election. So really all you're doing is trying to manifest your judgment to make it a little bit less political in that regard, at least. I think there will be a more robust discussion. But it's one of the reasons why Nancy McLean wrote her book, Democracy in Chains, is that, in fact, the big move has been by John C. Calhoun, by James Buchanan, by the Koch brothers for not years or decades, but more than a century, is to shackle democracy, is to make sure that the will of the people is limited by strictures by the Supreme Court. It has been only brief periods, Warren Court, for instance, when the Supreme, which happened to coincide with a lot of the dawn of the modern media age, and it got really famous. but it's only been brief periods where progressive change has happened because of courts. Progressive change usually happens because of bigger pools of people, not smaller rooms, but bigger rooms, people engaging and operating and activating more. And this is why I say that you're priceless, that you are the coalition of the benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason. What did we learn today? Well, we talked about legislative races. We did get updates that Cesar Sayoc has been arrested under suspicion for being the pipe bomber. He had pictures of Donald Trump on his van. We did have a chance to talk about what's happening with cable companies trying to take away community cable and the funding for community cable. We did have a chance to talk about, well, if you had a lamp and 3 wishes, what would your wishes be? What I want to leave you with is that whose job is it to make democracy work? Whose job is it to make sure that people have access to health care, that people have a decent environment, that people have a chance to vote? In some respects, in a market sense, it's nobody's job. That's why it's got to be all of our jobs. Where were you? What were you doing? And what are you doing this weekend? You're priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. Love you. Tom will be back Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From UN.